So I heard there's a concept in counseling called chosen theories. It's where you lean into the theories that seem to fit yourself and your clients best. They're your favorites. They're the ones you find most valuable to your work. I thought I would take that idea and run with it for this talk. Introducing you to my chosen theory, self-determination theory, and how we can work within that framework to help foster learner motivation in our classrooms. My name is Jared Quinn, and I'm the director for the Center for Teaching and Learning here at Stevens College. So, motivation and self-determination theory are my jam. I get really nerdy about this stuff, and I will talk your ear off about it given the chance. You know, like if I've recorded a session about self-determination theory for counseling faculty, you're going to hear a lot about it, and you're going to hear me nerd out, and I'm not sorry about that. But I've been working in higher ed for about 20 years, helping faculty create courses that they love to teach, that students are excited to take, and that administrators are proud to promote. Online, on-site, something in the middle, quite frankly, good teaching is good teaching. It's just the details that change a little bit. So I'm here with you today to talk about motivation. Motivated learners finish courses. They might not get all A's, but they can endure through the hard work of learning. Now, we can't force students to be motivated, but instructors have a huge influence over the learning environment. The motivating classroom is something instructors can actively shape. We can't teach away food insecurity. We can't instructional design healthy family dynamics for our students. And we can't pedagogy our way to lower tuition and college expenses. But we can take an active and intentional approach to making our classrooms, online or on-site, places where motivation can grow. So let me formally introduce you to William Deci and Richard Ryan's self-determination theory. Self-determination theory is all about human wellness. It's more of a strengths-focused approach as opposed to approaches like behaviorism, which mostly look at people through the lens of deficits. I think it's the most practical and influential theory that we can lean into in our world of teaching and learning. It's not about control, it's about the energy that comes from people feeling supported and healthy. It's bigger theory than just motivation, but that's where our focus is going to be. Self-determination theory says wellness comes from meeting three universal human needs: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. When these needs are internalized, that's when people thrive. And our work as educators in shaping our classrooms to be supportive environments. So Deci and Ryan say in these environments where people's needs are supported, people's curiosity, creativity, productivity, and compassion are most robustly expressed. So let's start with autonomy. So autonomy is about acting in alignment with our values. It's easy to see this and think of the American concept of independence, but those are different things. Autonomy isn't about looking out for number one and just doing whatever you want to do. It's about making choices that are authentic to your values. So in education, we talk about autonomy supportive classrooms versus demanding and controlling classrooms. An autonomy supportive instructor is responsive to learners. Supportive offers flexibility and uses interest to encourage engagement, whereas controlling instructors make the decisions, emphasize right answers, evaluate, and motivate through pressure and punishment. Some other things autonomy supportive instructors can do is listen more, make fewer directives, and respond to more student questions. Those are the ways we can take the student's perspective and help them develop their own autonomy and value for the subjects we teach. So I want to give you some examples of autonomy, both in on-site classrooms that I've seen and in online classrooms that I've seen. So in an on-site classroom, I want to talk about a physical therapy podcast. So I was working with this group, and like many courses, there was a lot to do in this course. And one thing that was getting lost is the stories of what it was like to be a physical therapist. They were doing the administrative piece, getting the forms done, getting the interns placed, but they were missing about the life of the practice. And so the instructors and I created a podcast. And the podcast followed along through the whole year touching on topics when the students would hear them in the class. Now, this was completely extra information. They weren't being tested over it. They weren't expected to listen to it. Nothing was required, and we certainly didn't even call it supplemental. It was just the stories of people practicing in the field, of the interim directors that were going to hire these students for their summer internships. It was about former graduates, what they wish they knew, and it was all kinds of great conversations. And over the course of the year, we found that 60% of the students chose to listen to this. They weren't being graded on it. There were no assignments. There weren't even like subtle pressures to do it. They were making the choice to engage in physical therapy life at a deeper level. Let's talk about online. I worked with a fluid mechanics course where we came up with this idea about fluid mechanics in the wild. The instructor really wanted the students to value the stuff they were doing inside the classroom with their lives outside the classroom. He wanted them to see these principles of fluid mechanics outside of their education. And so he created an optional assignment for students to take pictures or video of something fluid dynamics and submit it to the class. It was actually through the discussion forum. And the students loved this. They got all kinds of pictures from pool pumps, like pool water pumps, to bridges and dams, to probably one of the more conversational examples was, I believe it's called a bulldog. It's where you have an enormous margarita and you put like a bottle of beer in the huge margarita. But they took the video and they explained the fluid dynamics at play of the mixing of the drinks. And they started to get it. They started to see how their lives outside of the classroom were impacted by the stuff they were learning in the classroom. And it was their choice, how they pursued it, how they learned to value these things. So what does autonomy look like for you as the instructor? Because your motivation matters too. Yes, we should talk about the students and motivating the students, but you should also think about the instructor. What will motivate you to be more excited, to be more connected, to be autonomous? Think about those things. Write them down. We're going to come back to those. I do want to take a little side tangent and mention the picture on the screen here. So this comes from Tomer Ullman in the early days of ChatGPT. So Tomer asked ChatGPT to make a picture of a professor. And this is the one of the woman professor. And then Tomer kept asking ChatGPT, all right, make it more professor. And more professor. Make it more professor. And I just think the images that came out of it are amazing, and I wanted to show them off. And because I have the autonomy to put whatever pictures in this slideshow that I want to, I chose to do it. And so as we progress, you will see with each change in these pictures, just remember, more professor. All right, back to the topic. Competence. Now, competence is a big one in education. Some pretty good studies even point to competence as being the leading factor of the three that most influences academic outcomes like grades, pass-fail rates, and retention. You know, if you've ever failed a class or come close, this idea of competence being critical probably resonates. I took, in undergrad many years ago, I took 2 years of Hebrew. Why? I have no idea. I have no natural venues to speak or practice Hebrew, but I took it anyways. It was not great. My last semester, I was making a 40% at midterm. I even got the "I'm worried about you" talk from my instructor, who was great. But in that moment, I said to myself, man, because the rest of college had come relatively easy. I had to work, but I did well. But Hebrew wasn't like that. I said to myself, I understand why people drop out of college now. If all of my courses were like this, I would be gone too. Competence is key in the classroom. So again, when we talk about a competence supportive classroom, we're talking about affectance supporting versus overly challenging or inconsistent or otherwise discouraging. The way instructors can support learners' competence through this optimal challenge with encouraging feedback. Too hard, folks get discouraged. Too easy, they get bored. And of course, our classrooms are full of different people, often at different skill levels. So it gets complicated. It gets hard to build everyone's competence in practice. It doesn't mean we shouldn't try. So here are my examples for competence. So again, let's start with the on-site classroom. I worked with an evidence law course, and the instructor wanted to do something that was pretty wild in his field. He wanted to do an experiential learning with evidence. And he got permission to teach his normal 125 student large lecture evidence course, but then to take a group of 25 students and make them into a more experiential class. And so in this experiential class, they were divided into 4 groups, each with its own group name based on a famous law school alumni. And they had to not only learn the rules of evidence, but they had to teach the 3 other groups those rules. They would get a week, and they would go about teaching their peers in whatever ways they wanted, whatever ways they thought were most effective. It was a little messy at first, but then it was amazing, and they did it. And they had a dress code for the law firm. He had stationery for the law firm. It was about letting them build competence by doing the work of a junior lawyer. And so I got to do a mid-semester feedback with this group. And one thing they pointed out was that in that class, in that small group class, they understood how the rules of evidence work together in a full case. But they would talk about their peers in the large lecture who could understand the rules of evidence one at a time, but didn't quite know how to apply them to a bigger case. And these students are all in the same program. They're all studying together. And the small group students were able to build competence because they were doing the work in a supportive and challenging environment. So online, I worked with an engineering programming instructor in a foundational programming course. And so the thing about programming or statistics or anything math and process based is you get good by practicing. There's no shortcut. You have to practice. So this instructor built this huge series of quizzes for each lesson module. And the students could take the quizzes over and over and over and over and over again until they mastered them. And they were about the different points. They were very targeted. And they would build up to a final quiz that they could take for the real grade. So they got completion and mastery grades for 6 quizzes that prepared them for the one for the grade. But they got to practice over and over and over again when their grades weren't on the line, and they were able to build competence for when they could demonstrate their mastery through a larger exam. So what does competence look like for you as the instructor? What's going on when you feel like you're in your groove, when you feel like you're doing the instructor role in just amazing, amazing ways? What does competence look like for you as more professor? Sorry, I just had to make the more professor joke. Remember that? Yeah, whatever. Lastly, let's talk about relatedness. So relatedness and belonging are not quite the same thing, at least theoretically. But they've got huge overlaps. So you're welcome to think about relatedness as belonging because, quite frankly, relatedness is one of those goofy academic words that nobody outside of school uses in conversation. And looking at this definition, I love that relatedness is more than just being cared about. It's having the space and the opportunity to care about others. It's reciprocal. It's back and forth. It's not a one-way relationship. So when we talk about relationally supportive classrooms versus impersonal and rejecting, we talk about ones that build connection, especially between faculty and students. So there's some studies that look at relatedness in education. And I'll be honest with you, most of the studies that look at relatedness don't find much of a correlation between academic outcomes. Myself, among other folks in the field, say this is a problem, but we think it's actually a measurement problem. And so when we talk about relatedness, again, we're talking about belonging and connection. Well, there's more than one other type of person in a classroom. You've got the instructor, which is one dynamic, and the classmates, which is the second. So I'm among educational psychologists who says we should really be looking this from the lens of what's the instructor-student relatedness and what's student-student relatedness. And folks who've already studied that deeper than I have produced some research that says, hey man, yes, peer relatedness is important, but when it comes to academic success, the instructor-student connection is the one that really matters the most. So, a couple of examples again. On-site. So, I don't should people very much, but I'm going to should you for this one. You got to learn your students' names. Use table tents, use memorization games, flashcards. You have to learn your students' names and you have to pronounce them correctly. Few things will sink any feeling of relatedness faster than donking up someone's name. And so in my education classes, in my space, I use a practice called name stories, where you share your name, who gave you your name, and why. And along the way, you can share pronunciation tips. Whether this is your legal name or not, I don't care. I want to know what you want to be called by, and I want to know how to say it correctly. But when you ask about the story behind people's names, beautiful things come out, whether it's family dynamics, whether it's people have chosen the name they feel that most embodies who they are, or if you're like me, you were named after a TV cowboy. So that's a fun story too. But learn your students' names. That's one approachable way to build relatedness in your classrooms. So let's look at online. I worked with a sports journalism class, and they used Slack or Discord as kind of a messaging service. So Slack is a little bit like text message, only you don't have to share your phone number. So think about it like that. You can do it from your phone. But he had his whole class together, and they would do AMAs, Ask Me Anything, or sometimes call it live tweet an event. And so again, sports journalism, when the NBA would have their draft, he would open up these Slack channels for 12 hours that day, 9 to 9, and then not only give students questions, but just have a space where they can talk about what's going on in the draft. They can talk about all of the sports news in real time together, even though they were spread out across the country. Again, this is an online class, but they could be in these channels together, talking about the content of the course and building connection. All right. So thinking about the other side of that relatedness, what does it look like for you as the instructor? What does it look like when you've got a really great connection with a student or a class as a whole? Now we're really at more professor. This is peak more professor. But you've heard my stories. It's time to make your own motivation stories. So I have a job for you. What can you do to stoke some self-determined motivation in your students? Pick autonomy, competence, or relatedness, and write down a couple of ideas for something you could do in your class with your learners. Then, I want you to pick one. Just one. You only have to do one. Just one. Pick one thing that will help motivate your learners and do it really well for the whole semester and see what happens. But we're not done yet. I want you to do one more thing. What can you do to stoke some self-determined motivation in yourselves as the instructor? Pick autonomy, competence, or relatedness, and write down a couple of options of things you could do for each. Then pick one. Pick one thing that will help motivate you and do it really well for the whole semester and see what happens. Thanks for your time. Thanks for your attention. Good luck with motivating your learners. The little secret about classroom motivation is when you're motivated, they're going to be motivated too. So take care of yourselves, take care of your teams, and thanks again for being here.